My name is Claire Monroe, and I'm 34 years old. The night Nolan told me his ex-girlfriend was pregnant with triplets, I felt something inside me split so cleanly I could almost hear it. We were in my kitchen. Nothing dramatic, no storm outside, no shattered glass, just warm light over the counter, a half-cut lemon on the board, and the low hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between us. He looked like a man trying not to come apart. "Vanessa is pregnant," he said first. I remember blinking at him, waiting for the rest. Then he swallowed and added, "She says they're mine. Triplets. Claire, we need to start planning." For one suspended second, my body forgot how to respond. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I barely breathed. I just stared at him like the words might rearrange themselves into something less grotesque if I gave them enough time. Triplets. His ex. Start planning. Some sentences do not enter your life gently. They break the door open and make themselves at home before you understand what they've taken from you. Nolan sat down hard at my kitchen table and dragged both hands over his face. "I know how this sounds." "No," I said quietly. "I don't think you do." He looked up then, eyes red, voice wrecked in exactly the way that would have moved me if I hadn't already felt the ground shift under my feet. He told me it had happened months earlier. One night, one mistake. The kind people always describe as if betrayal becomes smaller when you compress it into a single sentence. He said it was before things between us had turned serious, before future talk, before all the little domestic rituals that had made me believe we were building towards something solid. But that wasn't true, and he knew it. We had already been solid. Maybe not engaged, maybe not married, but real. 3 years together. Shared passwords, Sunday groceries, my shampoo in his shower, his running shoes by my front door, holidays split between our families, quiet mornings that felt more intimate than grand declarations ever could. We weren't casual. We were long past casual by the time he claimed this had happened. I sat down across from him because my knees had started to feel unreliable. "And you're just telling me this now?" "She told me for sure today," he said. "She got confirmation from the doctor. She waited because she wasn't sure at first." I gave a brittle laugh. "Vanessa wasn't sure she was carrying triplets? Or wasn't sure they were yours?" His jaw tightened. "Claire, please." That word, please. Men always seem to reach for it when they want grace they have not earned. He kept talking. Vanessa was scared. Vanessa didn't know what to do. He had been panicking for hours before coming to me, because I was the one person he couldn't bear to lie to anymore. That last part almost destroyed me, because even then, sitting there with a knife still resting beside a half-cut lemon, I wanted to believe there was something noble in his confession. That maybe this was ugly, but honest. That maybe love was not about getting the perfect story, but surviving the ugly truth together. So I asked the question that made me hate myself later. What happens now? His entire face shifted when I said that. Relief. Real relief. Not sorrow for what he had done. Relief that I had not stood up and told him to get out. He reached across the table for my hand. "I don't know everything yet. I just know I want to handle this the right way." The right way. I let him hold my fingers even though mine had gone cold. That night he cried in my arms. Not because he loved Vanessa. He swore he didn't. Not because he wanted a life with her. He swore he didn't. He cried because he said he was ashamed, overwhelmed, terrified, and because he didn't want to lose me over a mistake he could never undo. If I sound calm now, it is only because memory sands down the edges. In the moment, I was not calm. I was trying to survive the humiliation of suddenly being recast in my own relationship. I had been the woman building a future. In the space of one conversation, I had become the woman expected to absorb someone else's wreckage with grace. And still I stayed. That was the part I judged myself for longest. But love can make endurance look like maturity. It can make self-abandonment feel noble. I told myself leaving immediately would be impulsive, cruel even. I told myself real adults faced hard things. I told myself that if he had come straight to me, maybe that meant there was still something salvageable in him. The next few days moved in a fog of strained tenderness. Nolan texted constantly, asked if I'd eaten, called me baby in that soft voice I had once trusted without thinking. He looked at me like he was afraid one wrong move would make me disappear. Instead of softening me, it unsettled me, because guilt has its own kind of attentiveness. Then the details started to bother me. At first, it was small things. When I asked how far along Vanessa was, he hesitated for half a second too long. When I asked whether he had been to an appointment, he said she wanted space. When I offered to come with him next time, not because I was generous, but because I wanted to see her face when she looked at me, he shut down completely. That would make everything worse, he said. For who? I asked. He didn't answer. Vanessa started hovering over our lives like perfume after someone has left the room. I had met her before, pretty in a deliberate way. Careful smile. The kind of woman who knew exactly how fragile, accidental could sound when used strategically. She texted him late, called him at odd hours, needed things clarified, needed reassurance, needed him. And I could feel my place in his life shrinking around her growing emergency. What bothered me even more was how polished his story remained. Too polished. He had shame ready. He had regret ready. He had practical concerns ready. But the actual emotional truth of it felt airbrushed, like a statement rehearsed in a mirror before delivery. Then there was Tessa, Vanessa's closest friend, a woman I had always dismissed as background noise. Sharp, organized, always around when she didn't need to be. Suddenly, her name kept appearing. Nolan mentioned her casually. Vanessa relied on her. Tessa was helping organize appointments. Tessa was handling stress. Tessa knew everything. And yet the first time I ran into Tessa after the confession, she looked at me as if I were the one person in the room she couldn't bear to face. That look stayed with me. One evening, about 2 weeks after my world had been neatly dismantled and handed back to me as a responsibility, Nolan fell asleep on my couch mid-conversation. His phone buzzed once on the coffee table. Then again. I looked. I didn't touch it. I didn't unlock anything. I just looked. The screen lit his face from below, and for a split second I saw the name before it vanished. Tessa. Not Vanessa. Tessa. A strange, cold clarity moved through me then. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Something quieter, more dangerous. Because lies do not usually collapse under one huge revelation. They collapse when one wrong detail makes every other detail start to rot. I sat there in the dark, listening to Nolan breathe, and felt the first clean edge of instinct cut through all the excuses I had been feeding myself. Something was wrong. Not messy, not complicated. Wrong. And for the first time since he sat in my kitchen and asked me to start planning for a life I had never agreed to, I stopped thinking about how to be understanding. I started thinking about how to find the truth. The next morning, I woke up with that same unnatural stillness inside me, the kind that comes right before something breaks. Nolan was still asleep on my couch, one arm thrown over his eyes like exhaustion could excuse anything. For a moment, I stood in the doorway and looked at him the way I imagine strangers look at wreckage from a safe distance. Not with love, not even with anger, just disbelief. 3 years. That was what kept repeating in my mind. Not because I thought it made me entitled to loyalty, but because 3 years should have meant I knew when the man in front of me was telling the truth. And now I wasn't sure I had ever known him at all. He woke up smiling weakly, the kind of smile people offer when they know they're on borrowed grace. Hey, he murmured, you okay? No, I thought, but women are trained to make devastation sound manageable. I'm tired, I said. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his face. I know this is a lot. That phrase again. A lot. As if what he had done belonged in the same category as work stress or car trouble. As if this were a difficult season instead of a moral collapse. I made coffee while he talked. He said Vanessa had another appointment coming up. He said she was overwhelmed. He said her hormones were making everything worse. He said he was trying to keep everyone calm. Everyone. The word hit me harder than it should have, because I suddenly understood that in his mind, I had already been assigned a role in this arrangement. Not his girlfriend, not the woman whose life he had detonated. I was the calm one, the reasonable one. The person expected to absorb discomfort without becoming inconvenient. I handed him a mug and leaned against the counter. How far along is she again? He glanced up too quickly, then looked away. A little over 4 months. A little over 4? I repeated. Or exactly. He frowned. Claire, does that matter? Yes, I said, it matters. His shoulders tightened. Why are you interrogating me? I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because men can confess betrayal and still somehow act wounded when you ask for basic facts. Because you came into my kitchen and asked me to help emotionally process the consequences of you sleeping with your ex. That's why. He exhaled hard through his nose and set the mug down. I'm not hiding anything. But he said it too fast. That was the thing about lies. Once you knew they were possible, normal conversations stopped feeling normal. Every pause became suspicious. Every explanation sounded rehearsed. Every inconsistency began glowing in the dark. Later that afternoon, Vanessa texted him while I was sitting beside him. I saw his screen light up, her name. 3 unread messages in a row. He angled the phone away before opening them. That tiny gesture landed heavier than any confession. I didn't say anything immediately. I let the silence stretch. I wanted to see if guilt would make him volunteer honesty. It didn't. "What did she say?" I asked at last. He shrugged, too casual. "Just stressed. She's emotional." I stared at him. That's not an answer. He looked annoyed now, which was almost insulting. "She's asking if I can come by later." Of course she was. My throat tightened. "And are you going?" He hesitated just long enough to give me the truth without speaking it. "I should," he said finally. "She says they're mine." There it was. The sentence he knew would pin me in place. Responsibility as a weapon. Fatherhood as a moral shield. Say the word children, and suddenly everyone expects a woman to step aside with dignity, even if she is the one being erased. I turned away before he could see my face fully. "Do whatever you think you need to do." He came up behind me then, touching my arm gently, carefully, as if I were the fragile one in this situation. "Claire, please don't make this uglier than it already is." I pulled my arm back. That line sat with me all day. "Don't make this uglier." As if ugliness had arrived because I noticed it. As if truth itself were the cruelty. That evening, after he left to see Vanessa, I sat alone in my apartment with a glass of water I never touched and replayed every strange thing from the last month. The secrecy, the timing, the sudden urgency, the way Vanessa had remained invisible while somehow dominating everything, the way Nolan spoke as if decisions had already been made and I was only there to emotionally approve them. Then I thought about Tessa. It wasn't just that her name had appeared on his phone. It was the look on her face the last time I saw her. Not pity, not smugness, fear. Real fear. The kind people wear when they know a structure is unstable and they're waiting for the collapse. I opened my laptop and stared at nothing for a long time before typing Vanessa's name into social media. What I found didn't expose anything dramatic. No one ever makes it that easy. But it showed me enough to make my stomach tighten. Photos. Comments, dates, smiles frozen in perfect angles. Vanessa at brunch, Vanessa posing with flowers, Vanessa leaning into a mirror selfie with one hand low on her stomach, even before she had announced anything publicly. And then Tessa, everywhere, at dinners, at weekend errands, at doctor office coffee runs, captioned vaguely enough to look innocent. Not romantic, not suspicious by itself, just constant. The kind of presence that told me Tessa knew far more than she should have. I clicked through photos until my eyes blurred. Then I stopped at one posted 2 months earlier. Vanessa at a rooftop bar, laughing while Tessa stood beside her, one hand on the back of Vanessa's chair. Nolan tagged in the comments below with a bland heart emoji that looked so forced it made my skin crawl. I stared at that picture for a long time. Something about it was wrong, but not in a way I could yet articulate, like hearing a piano slightly out of tune. The notes are technically there, the song still plays, but your body knows before your mind does that something is off. When Nolan came back later that night, I was waiting. He stepped inside, loosened his jacket, and gave me that tired, grateful look again. "She's not doing well emotionally." I kept my voice steady. "Did you go alone?" His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "What?" "To Vanessa's," I said. "Did you go alone?" He set his keys down more loudly than necessary. "Why are you asking me that?" "Because liars hate specific questions." "Because Tessa seems involved in this in a way I don't understand." He stared at me for 2 seconds too long. "She's Vanessa's best friend." "That's not what I asked." He took a slow breath, clearly trying to stay patient, which would have been impressive if he hadn't been the one standing in the ruins he created. "Tessa helps her, that's all." "All," I repeated softly. He nodded, but he couldn't quite hold my eyes. That was when I realized something else. Nolan was not just hiding facts, he was managing me, measuring how much I knew, adjusting his answers accordingly. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. The next few days only made it worse. He became overly attentive when we were alone and strangely unreachable whenever Vanessa called. He answered questions with emotional language instead of real details. He kept emphasizing duty, pressure, stress, fear. Never dates, never timelines, never clear explanations. It was like trying to grab smoke with my bare hands. Then his mother called me. At first, I assumed she was calling to apologize on behalf of the universe. Instead, she launched into the kind of carefully arranged sympathy that is somehow more offensive than blunt cruelty. "I know this is difficult, sweetheart," she said, "but sometimes life doesn't unfold in the order we hoped." I went very still. "Did Nolan tell you everything?" A pause. "He told me enough." That answer chilled me. Enough for what? Enough for sympathy? Enough for damage control? Enough to make me look unreasonable if I didn't quietly endure this with grace? She kept talking about compassion, about innocent babies, about how character is revealed in hard moments. I let her speak because interrupting her would have been wasted energy. But by the time the call ended, something inside me had hardened. Not against the babies, never them. Against the expectation that I should become a supporting character in a lie, just because other people found that arrangement emotionally convenient. 2 nights later, Nolan was in the shower when his phone lit up again on my nightstand. I didn't touch it at first. I just watched the screen glow in the dark. "Tessa." Then another message came in before the first preview disappeared. "She's spiraling. Call me before you talk to Vanessa." My pulse went slow, dangerously slow. Not call Vanessa. Call me before you talk to Vanessa. I stared at those words until the screen went black again. I still didn't unlock the phone. I didn't need to. Some truths don't arrive as proof. They arrive as pattern. And pattern was beginning to form all around me. When Nolan came out of the bathroom, toweling his hair dry, I was still sitting in bed. He smiled faintly. "You look like you're a million miles away." I held his gaze. "Maybe I am." His smile faded. I wanted, just for one reckless second, to throw the phone at him and demand the whole truth. I wanted to drag every secret into the light and watch him explain it until his own lies suffocated him. But instinct told me not yet. Because if he was lying, and by then I no longer believed there was any real chance he wasn't, confrontation without proof would only teach him to hide better. So instead I gave him something softer, more dangerous. I asked, "Nolan, are you absolutely sure those babies are yours?" He froze. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. That tiny fracture in his expression. That involuntary flash of panic before he rebuilt his face into something wounded and offended. "Of course I'm sure," he said. But he wasn't offended enough. And that was how I knew. The truth was out there somewhere, buried under guilt and performance and carefully selected half-confessions. I didn't know yet whether Vanessa was lying to him, whether he was lying to me, or whether he had chosen not to question a story that was convenient for him to believe. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was done being managed. If I wanted the truth, I was going to have to get it myself. And that was the night I started thinking about a paternity test. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was heartbroken anymore. That had already happened, quietly, in pieces I hadn't fully acknowledged. What kept me awake was something colder, sharper. The realization that whatever truth existed in this situation, I was not being trusted with it. And I was done accepting that. The idea of a paternity test didn't come to me like a bold, dramatic decision. It settled in slowly, almost reluctantly, like something I didn't want to need but couldn't ignore anymore. Because once you start noticing inconsistencies, your mind doesn't let you go back. The timeline didn't sit right. Nolan's hesitation didn't sit right. Tessa's involvement definitely didn't sit right. And more than anything, the way he kept insisting on certainty, without proof, sat the worst. So the next morning, I did something I never thought I would have to do in a relationship that had once felt safe. I started researching, quietly, methodically, without telling him. Non-invasive prenatal paternity testing, blood sample from the mother, cheek swab from the alleged father, results in days. Accuracy rates I read over and over again, as if repetition would somehow make the entire situation feel less surreal. It didn't, but it gave me something I hadn't had in weeks. Control. That afternoon, when Nolan came over, I didn't start with accusations. I didn't even start with emotion. I started with calm. "I wanted to talk," I said. He looked immediately tense, like someone bracing for impact. "Okay." I gestured for him to sit. "I need certainty, Nolan." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I said slowly, holding his gaze, "I'm not moving forward in any direction. Supporting you, staying with you, walking away, without knowing the truth. Not what you've been told, not what you believe, the actual truth." His jaw tightened. "Claire, I want a paternity test." The words landed between us like something physical. For a second, he didn't react at all. Then he let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're serious?" "Yes." He stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "That's unnecessary." There it was. Not offended, not hurt. Unnecessary. I watched him carefully. If it's unnecessary, then it should be easy. He turned to face me fully now. Claire, this is already a mess. You really want to drag Vanessa through more stress? I felt something inside me harden at that. Vanessa, I repeated, or you. His expression flickered again. That same microsecond of something unguarded before he composed himself. I'm thinking about everyone involved. No, I said quietly. You're thinking about control. That hit him. He exhaled sharply. Why are you doing this? Don't you trust me at all? The question would have crushed me weeks ago. Now it just sounded hollow. I trusted you before you walked into my kitchen and told me your ex is pregnant with triplets, I said. I trusted you before your story started shifting every time I asked a basic question. I trusted you before your phone became something I wasn't allowed to see. He flinched, subtle but real. I haven't done anything else wrong, he said, softer now, as if lowering his voice would make his words more believable. I stood up slowly, matching his height, his energy, but not his instability. Then prove it. Silence. For a long moment, he just stared at me. I could practically see the calculations happening behind his eyes. What agreeing would mean. What refusing would mean. Which lie was easier to maintain. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because if he had been completely innocent and completely certain, there would have been no calculation. Just agreement. Just clarity. Instead, he hesitated. I'll talk to Vanessa, he said finally. Not yes, not no. A delay. I nodded once. Good. But inside, I already knew. The next few days stretched in a strange, suspended tension. Nolan kept me updated, or at least he pretended to. He said Vanessa was overwhelmed. He said she didn't understand why this was necessary. He said she felt attacked. Of course she did. People rarely welcome truth when they've built something on uncertainty. But eventually, after enough back and forth and enough emotional framing, he came back with an answer. She agreed, he said. Too easily. That was the second moment that should have scared me more than it did. Because real resistance has texture, it has friction, it leaves marks. This felt too smooth. Still, I didn't back down. We scheduled it. The day of the test felt unreal, clinical, detached, like I was watching someone else's life unfold from a distance. Vanessa was there, pale but composed. Nolan stood beside her, trying to look supportive, trying to look like a man stepping into responsibility. And Tessa was there too. Of course she was. Hovering just behind Vanessa, eyes flicking between all of us, her presence impossible to ignore now that I was actually looking. Our eyes met once, and in that brief moment I saw it again. Fear. Not concern, not sympathy. Fear. The procedure itself was simple. Blood drawn, swab taken, paperwork signed, polite voices explaining timelines and accuracy as if we were discussing something routine. But nothing about this was ordinary. Because what we were really doing was not confirming a biological fact. We were testing a story that had already started to unravel. Afterward, Vanessa barely looked at me. Nolan tried to hold my hand. I let him, but there was no warmth in it anymore, just a quiet distance that even he seemed to feel. We'll have answers soon, he said, as if that was supposed to comfort me. I nodded. But answers were already forming in my mind. That night, I sat alone in my apartment again, replaying every interaction from the past few weeks with new clarity. The lies weren't loud. They were subtle, strategic, carefully placed to guide me toward a version of reality that benefited everyone except me. And the worst part? They almost worked. I had almost stepped into that life, almost rearranged my future around children that weren't connected to me, around a man who wasn't honest with me, around a situation built without my consent. That realization didn't break me. It woke me up. The waiting was the hardest part. Days passed slowly. Every message from Nolan felt heavier than the last. He tried to act normal, tried to talk about things unrelated to the situation, tried to maintain some version of us that no longer existed. I played along just enough. Because now I wasn't waiting for reassurance. I was waiting for confirmation. The email came on a quiet afternoon. No dramatic music, no warning. Just a notification. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, because once I did, everything would change. Not maybe. Definitely. I clicked. The words didn't blur. They didn't need time to sink in. They just existed. Clear, clinical, final. Probability of paternity, 0%. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, slower, as if maybe I had misunderstood the language. There wasn't anything to misunderstand. Not Nolan's, not his children, not even close. All three. 0. A strange calm settled over me then. Not relief, not anger, just clarity. Because in that moment, everything that had felt confusing suddenly made perfect sense. The hesitation, the shifting timeline, Tessa's fear, Vanessa's careful distance, Nolan's refusal to give straight answers. This wasn't a complicated situation. It was a lie. And the worst part? I still didn't know how much of it Nolan had known, and how much of it he had simply chosen not to examine. I closed the laptop slowly and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I waited for the emotions to hit. Rage, heartbreak, humiliation. But what came instead was detachment. Because once you see the truth clearly, you don't always explode. Sometimes you just step back. My phone buzzed a few minutes later. Nolan, did you get the results? I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back. Yes. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. And? I could have told him right then. Could have ended it in that moment over text. Clean. Quick. But something inside me refused. Because if he had pulled me into this entire situation while refusing to face what was obvious, then he didn't get a quiet ending. He didn't get control over how this story closed. So instead I wrote, "We need to talk, in person." There was a pause this time. Longer. Then, "Okay, tonight?" "No." I stared at the screen before adding, "At the baby shower." The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Then finally, "Claire, this isn't the place." I didn't let him finish. "It's exactly the place." I locked my phone and set it down. Decision made. The baby shower was 2 days later. 2 days of silence that felt heavier than anything we had gone through before. Nolan tried to call. I didn't answer. He texted. I responded with short, neutral replies, enough to keep him uncertain, not enough to give him comfort. Vanessa didn't reach out at all. Neither did Tessa, which told me everything I needed to know. The day of the shower arrived with artificial brightness, soft sunlight, clear sky. The kind of day people associate with celebration, with new beginnings. I dressed slowly, carefully, not for them, for me. Because if I was going to walk into that room, I was going to do it with control. The venue was already full when I arrived. Pink and blue decorations covered every surface. Balloons, gift tables stacked high, laughter that felt just a little too loud, like people were trying to convince themselves everything was exactly as it should be. Vanessa stood near the center of it all, one hand resting on her stomach, smiling as she greeted guests. Perfect, controlled, untouchable. For a moment, I just watched her. Then her eyes found mine, and everything changed. Her smile didn't disappear, but it froze, just slightly, enough for me to see it. Nolan spotted me seconds later. Relief flooded his face as he moved toward me, weaving through guests like I was the one thing in the room he could still anchor to. "Claire," he said softly when he reached me, "I'm glad you came." "Of course you are." I gave him a small, polite smile. Wouldn't miss it. His hand hovered near mine, unsure if he was allowed to touch me. I let him take it. Not because I wanted him to, because I needed him to think I was still playing his game. Across the room, I saw Tessa, watching. Not smiling, not moving, just watching. And when our eyes met again, she looked away first. That was all the confirmation I needed. The event continued like nothing was wrong. Games, laughter, guests congratulating Vanessa, complimenting her, asking Nolan questions about names, preparations, fatherhood. He answered them, confidently, easily, like a man who had rehearsed this version of himself. I stood beside him through all of it, silent, observing, waiting, because timing matters. And I wasn't here to interrupt. I was here to end it. Eventually, it was time for speeches. Vanessa's mother spoke first, warm, emotional, talking about blessings, family, unexpected joy. Then someone else, then another. And then Nolan leaned toward me, his voice low. "Do you want to say something?" he asked. There it was. The moment he didn't realize he had just handed me. I turned to him slowly. "Are you sure?" I asked. He hesitated, just for a second, then nodded. "Yes." I smiled, and stood up. The room quieted almost immediately. Conversations softened. Eyes turned. Attention shifted toward me. 50 people, maybe more, all expecting something soft, something supportive, something that would fit neatly into the story they had been told. I stepped forward, my heart steady in a way that almost surprised me. Because this wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about truth. "I just want to say something quickly," I began. My voice carried easily across the room. Calm, clear, controlled. "I know today is supposed to be a celebration." A few nods, soft smiles. "I know everyone here is excited, happy, supportive." More nods. Vanessa shifted slightly where she stood. Nolan's grip on my hand tightened. "And I think it's important," I continued, "that moments like this are built on honesty." The room stilled. Not completely, but enough. I reached into my bag slowly and pulled out the printed results. No one moved. No one spoke. I received some information recently, I said, holding the paper in my hand. Information that changes everything. Nolan went still beside me. Vanessa's face lost color. Tessa didn't look away this time. I glanced down at this page once, then back up, and said the words that shattered the entire room. These children are not Nolan's. Silence. Not loud, not explosive, just silence. The kind that spreads slowly. That creeps into every corner of a room until no one knows how to breathe without breaking it. I stepped forward and placed the paper gently on the gift table, right between wrapped boxes and pastel ribbons, right in the center of their perfect lie. Vanessa's mouth opened, closed, opened again. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw her clearly. Not as a victim, not as a rival, just as someone who had made a choice. I didn't have to lie either, I said. That was when everything finally broke. Vanessa's knees didn't give out immediately. For a few seconds, she just stood there, frozen in place, like her body hadn't caught up with what had just happened. Her eyes moved from me, to the paper, to Nolan, then back to me again, as if the truth might rearrange itself if she looked at it from enough angles. It didn't. What is this? Someone whispered from the crowd. That was all it took. The silence cracked. Voices started rising, not loud at first, but confused, overlapping, disoriented. People leaned closer to each other, murmuring, trying to piece together something that made sense. Vanessa's mother rushed forward. There has to be some mistake, she said, grabbing the paper with shaking hands. Nolan still hadn't moved. That was what struck me most. Not anger, not denial. Stillness. The kind that only comes when someone realizes the version of reality they've been holding on to is no longer sustainable. Say something, Vanessa whispered, turning to him. He didn't. His eyes were locked on the paper now, like if he stared hard enough, the numbers would change. They said, he started, voice thin. You said, Vanessa shook her head quickly. I didn't know, I swear, I didn't know for sure. Don't, I said quietly. Both of them turned toward me. Don't do that thing, where this suddenly becomes confusion instead of a choice. Vanessa's face crumpled. You don't understand. No, I cut in, calm and steady. I understand perfectly. And I did. Because the truth wasn't complicated. It never had been. What they had built wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a narrative, one that relied on emotion instead of verification, on urgency instead of clarity, on the assumption that no one would question it too closely once it was wrapped in the language of responsibility and babies. And it almost worked. Across the room, someone pulled out their phone. Then another, and another. That was the second wave. Not shock. Exposure. Because moments like this don't stay contained. They spread, quietly at first, then all at once, until the entire room becomes aware that something irreversible has just happened. Tessa finally moved. She stepped forward slowly, like someone walking into a fire she had known was coming. Vanessa, she said, voice tight. Vanessa shook her head again, backing away now. No, don't. But it was too late, because now everyone was looking at Tessa, and Tessa knew it. Her composure slipped just enough for the truth to show through. I told you to figure this out before it got here, she said under her breath. Not loud, but loud enough. Vanessa's eyes widened. Stop talking. I told you, Tessa repeated, more sharply now, the fear in her voice turning into frustration. This wasn't something you could just manage. The word hit the room like a second explosion. Manage. Not fix, not resolve. Manage. Nolan let out a quiet, broken laugh. It didn't sound like humor. It sounded like something inside him finally collapsing. You knew? He asked, his voice barely holding together. Both of you knew? Vanessa's silence answered him before her words ever could. He staggered back a step, shaking his head slowly. And you still... He looked at me then, something like horror flashing across his face. You still let me... Yes, I said, because there was no point softening it now. They let you believe it, and you let me believe it. That was the part he couldn't escape. Because even if Vanessa had lied to him in the beginning, somewhere along the way, he had made a decision. Not to check. Not to question, not to verify, because certainty might have forced him to make a different choice. And ambiguity gave him room to keep everything, or at least try to. The room was unraveling now. Guests were stepping back, creating distance like they could physically separate themselves from the situation. Conversations turned into quiet arguments. A few people were already heading for the door, shaking their heads, whispering as they went. Vanessa's mother looked like she might collapse. Who is the father? Someone asked from the back. No one answered. Of course they didn't, because that question wasn't the point anymore. The point was the lie, and how long it had been allowed to exist. Nolan finally looked at me again, really looked this time, not as someone he was trying to convince, not as someone he was managing, as someone he had lost. I didn't know, he said. Maybe that part was true. Maybe it wasn't. It didn't matter anymore. You didn't want to know, I replied. That was worse. Because it was accurate. He flinched like I had hit him. Vanessa sank into a chair, her hands covering her face, as quiet sobs started slipping through her fingers. No one rushed to comfort her immediately this time. Sympathy had been interrupted by doubt, and doubt is hard to recover from in a room full of witnesses. Tessa stood beside her, but even she looked unsure now. Because whatever control they thought they had over this situation, it was gone. I felt it then. Not victory, not satisfaction, just release. Like something that had been pressing against my chest for weeks had finally lifted. I didn't need to stay. I didn't need to hear more explanations, more apologies, more attempts to rewrite what had already been exposed. So I stepped back, quietly, without announcing it. No one tried to stop me. Not Nolan, not Vanessa, not anyone. Because some endings don't need permission. They just happen. Outside, the air felt different, colder, sharper, real. I walked to my car slowly, each step grounding me more than the last. My hands were steady, my breathing even, my mind clear in a way it hadn't been in weeks. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door. For a moment, I just stared ahead, and then finally I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears, slipping down without resistance, because I wasn't mourning Nolan. I wasn't mourning Vanessa. I was mourning the version of my life that had almost happened. The future I had almost stepped into without questioning it. The person I had almost become, someone who would have learned to live inside a story that wasn't true just because it was easier than confronting it. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Calls, messages, Nolan, unknown numbers, people trying to understand, explain, pick sides. I didn't answer any of them, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. I started the engine and drove away. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded, slowly, like something leaking through cracks I hadn't even known were there. By the time I got home that night, my phone had already filled with messages. Nolan, Vanessa, unknown numbers, friends, people who had been at the shower, people who hadn't, but somehow already knew. That's how things like this work. Truth doesn't stay contained. It spreads. I put my phone face down on the table and walked past it, because for once, I didn't feel the need to respond. Not immediately. Not at all. The next morning, I made coffee like I always did. Same mug, same quiet kitchen, same morning light. But everything felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just clearer. I picked up my phone eventually. Nolan had called 13 times. Texted even more. Claire, please talk to me. I didn't know. I swear to you, they lied to me too. Please don't shut me out like this. I read every message. Then I locked my phone again. Because whether he had known or not was no longer the point. He had still brought that chaos into my life. He had still asked me to stand beside him in it. He had still expected me to accept a reality without ever verifying it. And that was enough. Vanessa left a voicemail. I listened to it once. Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it before. I was scared, she said, the words breaking apart between breaths. I didn't know how to tell the truth once it got this far. I thought if everything settled, if people accepted it, then it wouldn't matter anymore. I closed my eyes. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. Not because it excused what she did, because it revealed it. She hadn't been hoping for forgiveness. She had been hoping for permanence, for a lie to stabilize into reality. And if that had happened, if no one had questioned it, I would have been part of that structure, living inside something that was never real to begin with. I didn't call her back. I didn't call Nolan either. Instead, I blocked both of them. Clean. Final. Because some conversations don't bring closure. They just reopen doors you've already walked through. The next few weeks were quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not peaceful, not immediately, just empty. And I let it be. I took time off work, not because I couldn't function, but because I didn't want to perform strength for anyone. I didn't want to smile and say I was fine when what I really needed was space to understand what had almost happened to me. I walked more, cooked more, slept at strange hours. Some days I felt angry. Sharp, focused anger that came in quick bursts. Other days I felt nothing at all. And then, occasionally, I felt something close to gratitude, which confused me at first, until I understood why. Because I hadn't lost my life. I had avoided it. A month later, there was a knock at my door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Nolan. He looked different. Not dramatically, but enough. Less certain, less composed. Like whatever version of himself he had been holding together had finally started to crack. I just want to talk, he said. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, not inviting him in, not giving him that access again. There's nothing left to talk about, I replied. He shook his head quickly. There is. You don't understand everything. I understand enough. His voice broke slightly. I lost everything. I looked at him for a long moment. And for the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel pulled toward him at all. No urge to comfort, no urge to fix. Just distance. Yes, I said, you did. He swallowed hard. Do you hate me? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Because hate would have been easier. Cleaner. But it wasn't what I felt. No, I said finally. I just don't trust you. And that was worse. Because you can rebuild from anger. You can't rebuild from the absence of trust. He stood there, like he wanted to say more. Like he was searching for the exact sentence that would undo everything that had already happened. He didn't find it. And I didn't wait for him to. I hope you figure your life out, I said quietly. Then I turned and went back inside. That was the last time I saw him. Life didn't transform overnight after that. There was no sudden glow-up, no dramatic revenge arc. Just time and small, steady changes. I started therapy for the first time in my life. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand how I had come so close to ignoring my instincts completely. We talked about trust, about boundaries, about the difference between compassion and self-abandonment, about how love should never require you to silence your own doubt just to keep something intact. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic, but it was real. 6 months passed, then a year. I moved apartments, changed routines, let some friendships fade and rebuilt others from a place that felt more honest. I heard through other people that the babies had been born. Healthy. Safe? I felt relief when I heard that. From a distance, where I belonged. One evening, sitting alone with a cup of coffee, I came across an old photo of Nolan and me. We were smiling, carefree, completely unaware of what was coming. I didn't delete it, but I didn't linger either. Because not every memory needs to be erased. Some just need to be understood. And then, unexpectedly, I felt it. Not sadness, not anger, clarity. If I hadn't questioned things, if I had chosen comfort over truth, if I had been afraid to look difficult, suspicious, or unkind, I would have built a life inside someone else's lie. For years, maybe decades. And that realization didn't scare me anymore. It grounded me, because walking away hadn't made me selfish. It had made me free. Love without honesty isn't love. It's manipulation. Trust isn't blind. And commitment isn't something you owe to a story that was never real. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to demand truth. You are allowed to leave. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Because the life you save might be your own.